The Philadelphia Church of God presents the Trumpet Daily.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Trumpet Daily. How would you respond if an apostle of God, personally trained by Jesus Christ, told you that we are living in the last hour of this age? Would you quickly dismiss such a comment as being religious fanaticism? Or would you accept that statement as being the truth of God? This is what God's people must have asked themselves in the first century after receiving John's first epistle. Think on this for a moment. The Apostle John's admonition comes right out of the New Testament of your own Bible. And if you know very much about Bible prophecy and the principle of duality, then you know that what John wrote wasn't even for the first century church primarily. It was aimed squarely at the people of God living in the latter days. Little children, it is the last hour, John wrote. As we will learn on today's program, God is calculating time as never before. He's even breaking it into specific increments just before His Son returns. The main message for today is on the subject of the last hour. It's a segment my father recently taped for his weekly program, The Key of David, which plays on nearly 200 television stations worldwide. This segment, by the way, will also be airing on The Key of David this very weekend. So with that, we'll move to the main message for the day, presented by Gerald Fleury.
Greetings, everyone. Osama bin Laden is dead, and it seems like the whole world is discussing it. He was killed by the U.S. Navy SEALs on May the 1st of this year. I wrote about 7 years ago that his attack on the Twin Towers, the 9/11 attack, was indirectly tied to Bible prophecy. Is that possible, that something like that could be tied right in with Bible prophecy? Osama bin Laden was one of the greatest terrorists in the world, and he wrote an open letter to the United States, to the people of the United States, to you. He had some real major criticisms that he wanted to talk about, and it was addressed to all of the American people. I'm going to give you a few quotes from that letter, and we'll see what you think about it. And see if you think that we should be responding to it. I think I'm about the only one that has really ever addressed that letter in detail. I don't think anybody else is doing it. But Osama bin Laden caused us a lot of problems, that is the U.S. He bombed the American embassies in Africa, the Khobar Towers in Saudi Arabia, and the USS Cole, and then, of course, the Twin Towers, where he killed 3,000 innocent people. The worst terrorist attack ever on American soil. Was that attack indirectly tied to Bible prophecy? Is that possible? Let me read to you what I wrote in 2004. And this is taken from the booklet, The Last Hour, which is about John's epistles. Here's what I wrote. God began to reveal this truth about the last hour to the Philadelphia Church of God on May 5th, 2001. That's all about John's epistles. Approximately 4 months later came the September 11th terrorist attacks on the U.S. I believe God allowed us to receive this physical sign that we had entered the last hour. The worst terrorist attack ever on American soil powerfully reinforced our new revelation about the last hour. Now that is pretty strong, but God backs His words with deeds. God does that. This prophecy in John's epistles about the last hour, we understood that on May the 5th, 2001, and of course it opened up the whole all of the epistles of John to be understood as primarily for this end time. Now when that was revealed, it was about 4 months before September the 11th, 2001, when the the attack on the Twin Towers occurred. And we believe that God just allowed that to happen to reinforce His revelation that we are in the last hour. Now that may seem ridiculous to some people, but this is New Testament doctrine, and God says these prophecies and all of the New Testament and the Old Testament are there to be understood. And especially those prophecies that are for this last hour, or this end time, the last hour of man ruling over man. And then after some very deadly problems we're going to have to face, Jesus Christ is going to return at the end of that hour and give us peace and joy forever. Now that's something to get excited about. What if this prophecy is tied directly to that last hour? This Twin Towers event and all of that. Well, we believe that you can prove that, and you need to understand this last hour. It's just a little short span of time, the very last little sliver of time that we have before Jesus Christ returns to this earth. But that last hour is going to be filled with problems and troubles for this world. And Jesus Christ is going to have to return to put a stop to all of it. But the thing that we want to focus on is, if we're in that last hour, and we are, and I've proven it to myself, then the conclusion of it is actually the return of Jesus Christ to rule this earth forever. And of course, after that 1,000-year period, the Father will come down to this earth, and He will be in charge, but Christ will rule under Him. That's the family government that God has established. But here's the thing. Now, if, let's say, if the greatest, the pinnacle, let's say, of Osama bin Laden's success is when he struck the Twin Towers in America, was like the beginning of this last hour, do you think maybe his death might be, or might portend the end of this last hour? And then, of course, the good news that follows after all the bad news. Is that something that you could entertain in your mind? That, I mean, these are prophecies that ought to be alive in our minds. God is alive. The Bible is a living book. We must understand these prophecies, or it's all, religion is just meaningless. We don't understand our own Bibles. Just have to remember that all of these events that I'm talking to you about really are tied directly to the second coming of Jesus Christ. So I'm not talking to you about bad news, although we're going to bring a lot of bad news upon ourselves before He gets here, but He's coming oh so soon. Just look around at all the problems you see in this world, and it ought to frighten anybody who really understands what's going on. And there's only one way out. And the epistles of John tell you that, show you what that is. Now, if people, when they see the death of Osama bin Laden, many people are going to be prone to believe, and I think already do, that, well, this is like the end of the war against terrorism, which we don't even like to call it that, but that's what it is. But let me tell you, your Bible says it is not the end of the war against terrorism, and that it is in fact going to get worse before it gets better, and a lot worse. That is what Bible prophecy tells us. Let me read that to you in 1 John 2 and verse 18. That is the part about the last hour. Verse 18, little children, it is the last hour. It shouldn't be the last time. This is the only place in the Bible, really, that this is discussed by John himself, and it should be the last hour. Little children, it is the last hour. And as we have heard that Antichrist shall come, even now there are many Antichrists, whereby we know that it is the last hour. I mean, the church was in trouble then. The church, in John's age, and the church is in trouble today. And 95% of God's people have turned away from Him in this very last hour of man's rule over man. You see, we must understand these scriptures if we're going to be able to follow God, because after all, God put them there for us to understand them and to believe them and be stirred and moved by them and inspired by them. That's what they're there for. I'll tell you, these events that I'm talking to you about are a warning. Even if we don't get it, they're still a warning and a witness to us. But we ought to understand it, and it's going to save us a lot of trouble and a lot of difficulty in the future. And remember this, God never says anything in vain. He never states one word in vain, not one. So once we understood this last hour, then we realized that this whole book is for this end time, and then you can see that very clearly, and it's all explained in this wonderful booklet on the last hour. And if you don't have a copy, you really do need one, because this is about what's going on in your world right now and what you can do about it to avoid the catastrophes. There's so much that we can do. So God did not only reveal the last hour, but He revealed the entire book. But why do you suppose that maybe we might be having some of these problems today? Let's say in America and Britain and the Jewish nation in the Middle East, the three nations that are primarily fighting the war against terrorism. Let me read to you what I wrote in this booklet. The United States spreads its pornographic movies and obscene music around the earth through the internet. America and Britain have the best technology in the world. And also they both have the most pornography, and especially America. But I wrote, we are better equipped than any nation has ever been to deliver a message. But our message to the world is dominated by the worst pornographic filth humanity has ever seen. It is America's #1 worldwide business. Depraved music is our #2 export. The world is full of violence and ready to explode into nuclear warfare, and America's strongest messages to the world is the filthiest, Satan-inspired trash ever seen and heard. Now, those are strong words, but let me just think about this for a moment. Please think about it and get the picture here. We're facing, as our #1 problem, human survival. Human survival. And here we have the greatest technology in all of the world, and America's #1 message or export is pornographic material. That's our #1 message to the world. That's what this is about. Are we a righteous nation? Are we a religious nation? Well, how about are we a biblically oriented nation? And I can tell you we are not. We are not. Now, the second major, let's say second message, our second major main message or export is, a lot of it is depraved music. It's not all that way, but far too much of it is. Most of it is. And this is what our message is to the world. We have all this technology, and we have all this wealth that has frankly been blessings that God has given us because of Abraham's obedience, and I can prove that to you as well. We talk about that in our book on the United States and Britain and prophecy, and you can prove that to yourself. And this is the way we're spending our money in this end time, when we ought to be sending out a message to the entire earth. Much different than that.